On to Joy, what Joy shared this week. Okay, so for this, what Joy developed here was in preparation for a workshop going on this weekend. Also, we're going to address Joy's question after looking at this icon set here. And this was cool to see. So it looks like what Joy did here was brainstorm a bunch of words related to travel photography, and then experimented with expressing some of those words and ideas with icons. And it's really cool to see the iteration that you went through and trying out different styles for each of those icons. And then it looks like as the final step, kind of picked your favorite of each of those after experimenting and iterating. And like Melaine did, like we mentioned before, listing out different the words or ideas that relate to that specific icon. So it looks great having two or three ideas for each of those individual icons. I hope this looks like this will be a useful thing to have done and potentially to have on hand for the workshop tomorrow or this weekend, whenever it is. Joy, would you be willing to come on? I'd be curious to hear what your experience was like just going through this exercise of brainstorming these words, experimenting with different images. I know you mentioned planes specifically in your post, but I'd love to hear kind of just a big picture of how this all went for you. Hi, Joy, you are on. How is your Friday
Hello.
going?
It's going well.
Yeah, so tell me a bit about your experience going through this process here of developing a set of icons for a specific purpose and topic.
Well, I'm very word oriented, so I found the brainstorming the keywords was fairly easy, and I got a huge list, more than I was willing to even attempt to draw icons
Right,
for.
right.
But then that gave me a list to pick and choose from, so I could kind of choose the concepts that seemed like they might be most important, and especially the concepts that where one drawing might mean three different things that would be useful.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because I'm starting to look at some of your words here, like ISO and meter and light, and a lot of things that could, if you have to do it in a general sense, you could just use a camera specifically for those, wide variety. And well, it's a workshop on travel photography, I guess. So, in a sense, your camera could be your default for just about everything. Um, Yeah, and I mean, I like that you mentioned too, your ability anytime you go through this process. And I think for those of us that are kind of word oriented, um, we're going to come up with a lot of words, and we aren't necessarily from the get go going to want to develop visuals for all of those words. But you can imagine how, next time if you do something else related to travel photography in the future, you have these already, and you can kind of chip away at the list of things that you don't have yet. Um, Especially as you see what comes up in the workshop itself. Uh, this is great. And how was it? Describe, if you can, Joy, the process of coming up with different versions when you kind of went through the iteration of drawing and experimenting. What was that like?
I went to that website, the Noun Project that someone mentioned on the forum, and they give you a whole bunch of different icons to represent things. And so then I kind of started with those to give me an idea. And then like the camera one, I actually got my camera out so I could draw one that looked a little like my camera.
Nice. Yeah, that's great to be able to personalize it. And I find that more enjoyable to be able to actually look at a real physical object in front of me and kind of like break that thing down into something that's quickly drawable. maybe that's because it's kind of more personal. Like it is this thing that I have, and a thing that I've used, and I know what. There's a little bit of a connection but to that object. I find that sometimes more enjoyable than just like copying a icon or adapting a image that I find on Google or something like that. Um, did you find a similar thing, Joy? Did you enjoy drawing from an object that you own more than an icon that you found somewhere else, or was it more or less equal?
I did, but I liked having the models of the simplified drawings so that I felt like it helped me choose which lines are important. Because I sometimes, when
Right.
attempt to draw from life, I tend to get confused about, okay, what line really do I need to show? And by looking at these icons, I was able to say, well, that worked for that kind of camera, so this kind of camera is similar and different in this way, and I can figure out which lines I want.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you mentioned that about um, taking a real object that you see and drawing a simplified version of it. I think you hit it right on that the key is deciding, okay, what what lines are worth drawing, or like what are the important things to capture about that object. Um, and I think that is something, I think we get better at that the more we do it. The ability to like take a potentially complex object and decide how to distill it. But it's kind of cool to potentially come at it from like both ends. Like on the one end, from time to time, you are taking a physical object that you see in the real world and paring it down, and on the other side, you use these very simple icons that are already simplified. So as you mentioned, you can kind of see, okay, so that's how they chose to represent a camera or a photograph or whatever it is. And I feel like by looking at both of those and practicing both of those, that you'll kind of eventually meet, they will inform each other, I guess. That looking at the icons might help you over time figure out the best way to represent a physical object in a simplified form. Does that make sense, Joy?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool.